Okay, good morning, class. So today we are basically going to talk about corporation, right? So let's actually start today's class with the way basically when we actually we're going to discuss about the different features and history of corporation. But let me when we start this unit, let us first talk about what corporation is. That's what basically you need to know. Now when we talk of corporation, like corporation is basically an institution. It's an institution. We can also say it's an instrument, right? It's an instrument via which capital can be accumulated. Okay, why? For production and distribution of goods and services, and also to make investments, right? So that's basically the what corporation is. So like any business corporation that is being formed. So the main objective is to actually have ensure that production of goods and services takes place, so that profits comes up to the owners of the corporation, that is the shareholders. Okay, they are the owners. They are the ones who are investing, right? Okay. So what do we say? In other words, we are saying, when we did say that it's a mechanism, right, whereby like we are talking of capital being accumulated, and who accumulates the capital? It can be done by, it's provided by the shareholders, but it's not just only capital, but expertise, labor, right? So all these things are provided by different people. Why do they provide? Because it gives them maximum benefit. They're providing it with the maximum benefit. So who are the people who are involved there? See, for instance, we have the shareholders or the investors who are, what do? They provide with their money to get a share of the profit, but they are not responsible for the operations of the organization. The management is one who is actually responsible for the operations, but they do not take any responsibility of the money that's coming from the investors or shareholders, right? So in that case, what happens? Shareholders have limited liability. Yes, liability and limited involvement. Why? Because they are not operating in the business. They're just providing with the money, right? But what is the limited liability that they have? Limited, there is the responsibility that they have, the limited involvement that they have. They have the right to elect their directors, and the fiduciary obligation of directors and management is to protect their interest. So that's fiduciary means, which is legal obligation, okay, bound to. So shareholders provide with money, and in return, the directors and management has to protect the interest of the shareholders. Okay, so next comes up, like, now what happens when we talk of corporation, right? So there are actually a lot of people who are involved there: directors, managers, employees, shareholders, customers, creditors, suppliers, the society as a whole, government. Everyone is involved, right? So that's basically is when we are talking of corporation. So corporation is an entity, it's a business entity, which is the main purpose is to manufacture goods and services to ensure that's profit, and all of these people are a group of people who are involved into it, right? So when we actually connect these and all these we call them all of them as constituents, okay, or entities. Now there is a big relation amongst all these entities, right? So when we actually talk of corporation, we have to talk about corporation and how all the entities are interrelated with the corporation. So study of these of all these constituents and their interrelationship with the corporation is called corporate governance, right? So in other words, corporate governance is the study of the connection of all these relationships or entities with the corporation as well as with one another. We will be discussing in details. Now, coming up next is where we talk of corporate governance, right? So, if you see this is a corporate governance framework, right? So, you have board of directors, laws, business practices and ethics, disclosure, transparency, risk and performance management, monitoring everything, and it needs to be communicated properly to all the or everyone, all the entities. So, there is a big interrelationship, and with this helps in running the corporation. So we will be talking about all of these in details, right? So in other words, when we say corporate governance, it's a system, it's a mechanism, it's a framework with the help of which companies are directed and they are controlled, right? And it involves both regulatory as well as market mechanism, right? The roles and responsibilities between company's management, board, shareholders, and other stakeholders. Stakeholders are who are stakeholders? Stakeholders are all those entities who are directly or indirectly related with the organization. Now, we just spoke about who are the stakeholders: the directors, management, employees, shareholders, customers, suppliers, government, community. It could be any others, right? So, everyone. So, and when we talk of stakeholders, now stakeholders can be external as well as internal, external to the organization. So who are the external stakeholders? They are the shareholders, the debt holders, trade creditors, suppliers, customers, and community as a whole, right, who are affected by the activities of the organization. And internal stakeholders are the board of directors, executives, and other employees who are within the organization. Right. So, what are the main features or four main features of corporate governance? There are four main features: limited liability of investors, free transferability of investor interest, legal personality, centralized management. Okay, and according to Dean Robert Clark, he said that he added along with this that he said that there are three developments that happened starting in the late 19th century that helped in making these four features very, very important. And what are these three developments which helped in making these features important? The first one is that the need of the firms were far more larger than previously. That has been like than which was what was there previously, right? The firms needs had grown. Why? Because technology advances are going on. So and you have the firms are competing with each other. So they have to stay in the market. Their needs also grows, right? Better technology, better people, like a better managerial system, everything comes into play. Second is the need to accumulate capital from variety of sources. If you have to reach out to wider market, then what happens up here is you need to have more and more capital. Money is important, right? And the third condition that came up was that private ownership of investment property, right? That has to be accepted as a social norm. It has to be accepted, right? Private ownership of investment property. So all these three developments led to the which led to the importance of all these four main features. Now let's go into details of these four main features. First comes up is limited liability. Limited liability, when it says that that corporation is separate from its owners and employees, right? So corporation is the business as a whole that's totally separate from the owners and its employees. If the business is not running properly, it's the owners and the employees do not have responsibility for this. They do not have to take that responsibility. Whereas if the owner is into trouble or the employees are creating problem, business does not have to take any responsibility. That's why it's limited liability. The business goes bankrupt, the owners do not have to take any responsibility for this responsibility. Okay. Transferability. Transferability means where what happens, there is an ability to transferability comes from the word transfer, that is to ability to transfer one's shares or holdings freely. Okay, you can, a shareholder can easily transfer their shares by selling. Okay, they can sell it to anyone, they have that right to transfer it to some other person's name by selling it. Okay, next comes up is legal personality. Now, legal personality is where we talk of the corporation. Corporation has its own identity, right? In a partnership, what happens if one of the partner dies, then or partner leaves the business, then that business has to close down. Whereas in case of a corporation, if a corporation will go on living even if the owners are not there, even if the partners resign, so it doesn't make any problem. So corporation will continue to live as long as there is money, capital. It has nothing to do with the owners. Owners change. Like for instance, what we had the Reliance Group with Dhirubhai Ambani, and then his two sons, Anil Ambani and Mukesh Ambani, they took over. So the owners started changing, right? But the business carried on. So business, that corporation had its own identity as long as money is there. Okay, the last one that is there is centralized management. Okay, now, centralized management, here what happens in this case is the power, in case of corporation, the power to determine the company's direction is given to the directors, and the power to control its day-to-day operations is given to the managers, right? In case of partnerships, what is also happening, like when a decision is made, it's through consensus or majority vote, but corporation is decided, centralized. Power lies in the hands of the directors and the managers. Directors give the direction, day-to-day operations handled by the managers. Okay, now let's actually come to the next topic. Is we are talking of corporate governance, so let's talk of how the concept has come about, the development. Right. So the concept of corporate governance is not new. It started with the 17th century. So until the beginning of the century, 17th century, the main form of organization was partnership, right? Partnership where it was jointly owned business firms were there, right? They had their own unlimited liability and all. And the first corporation that came into existence was the British East India Company, right? It's also known as the John Company, which is a joint stock company. We will be talking about joint stock company in details a little later, right? So that was the first company which came about. And at that time, the company had 125 shareholders. That's quite a lot. And the total capital was 72,000 pounds, which was quite huge, right? Now, after that, what happened, corporations for the next 200 years, corporations in general remain small institutions. They were small, and it's not quite big, right? Then comes up where up with the coming up of the industrial revolution. Next phase is the industrial revolution, right? With the industrial revolution, what was basically happening at that time is new firms coming up. There was a need for huge capital, right? So big firms were coming up, and industry that grew at that time was the railways, right? So big corporations coming up means at that time the concept of limited liability came into play, right? So see, it's the 18th century. So now industrialization started growing and became more and more popular in the 19th century. So what happened at that time? People started moving from the rural sector to the urban sector in search of jobs, right? That started coming up. Okay, and what was happening at that time was The corporations were then they got slowly transformed into state controlled organizations. Government started controlling. They initially it was government was there, but then they changed into unlimited private corporations. Government, which have initial like the if you talk of the East India Company, that was owned by the government. Like the Queen was in charge, was in to overall who were controlling it. So it was the government was there. But with industrialization happening, more demand for capital coming up. So that's where privatization came into play. So there was a huge transformation, a drastic transformation from state-controlled organizations to private organizations. State-controlled organizations had unlimited liability, whereas private organizations, they had limited liability. Okay, limited liability, limited accountability. That was the change. That's how the change coming out. Private corporations, private businesses starts developing. What also became remarkable change at that time was share trading. Share trading came into play. That also was happening at that time. Share trading. So, where shareholders, what were they doing? They could easily sell their shares and buy shares and move out. They could sell their shares and move out of the organization. So, which is what is also known as exit option. So, the exit option, the concept of exit option in the share market is not a new concept. Or share trading is not a new concept. It was there. It was there. It started with industrialization. Okay. Then what happened, like towards the end of 19th century and beginning of 20th century, and as we are progressing, what happened more and more, like control of corporations, it started moving, like it got the control got shifted from the owners to the managers. So managers were taking care of the day-to-day operations, and that's how there was separation of ownership and control. Owners, someone who owns it, and controlling was done by the managers, group of people, right? So this is how the concept of corporate governance has developed, and that's the concept that we have today. Okay, next comes up topic difference between company and corporation. Now, as what do we do as laymen, as common people? We often make the mistake of saying, we say company and corporation, we do say it, right? But there is a difference. What is that difference? Is corporation is a type of company. Okay, is a type of company. So which means that all corporations are companies, but a company is not always a corporation. So company is any entity, yes, which is involved in business. It could be a proprietorship, it could be a partnership, or it could be a corporation, right? So let's go into the different types of companies that we have, right? Sole proprietorship, that's the first type, where basically sole proprietorship is where the business is owned by one person, right? And so it's not a formal organization, right? And so the business does not is not separated, does not exist separately from its owners. It does not exist. So what happens? The sole proprietor pays taxes on revenue from the business under his or her name, right? And it's solely responsible for all the financial operations, including payment of all the debts. So if the business is into trouble or suit, the owner's personal resources will be at risk, right? Because there's no separation of the business from the owner, right? And so what happens is, if you are a sole proprietor and you want to have a business under your name, so you do not have to file and assume business name. You do not have to create a business name, right? You can actually operate the business under your name, right? Okay, but if you choose to have a different name for your company, you will have to apply for a state issued assumed name certificate, which is called DBA, doing business as, I'm such and such person, sole proprietor doing business as a different name. So you have to have a permission. Now, next type of company is general partnerships. General partnerships, it's where it involves two or more people, similar to sole proprietor, where each partner will pay his or her taxes separately using their own ID, tax ID number, and but the company does not exist as a separate entity. It's under the name of these two persons, two or three, right? And the money, the financial resources of the business partners could be at risk if there is a problem with the business, right? So, and what happens if any of the partner just passes away? If they pass away or if they leave, the business ends, right? Third type is where we talk of corporation. Corporation, corporation, as we said, it's a business entity that exists, that has a legal identity, and it exists. It's that's legally existing, which is separate from its owners. It has its own legal entity. It's totally separate. So it has the shareholders. Who are the owners? They are the shareholders, right? And what is their percentage of ownership? It depends on how much they are the owners of how many shares. So they are the owners, but they do not control. Controlling is done by the directors, by the managers. So corporations are more complex than unincorporated businesses. Unincorporated business is those businesses which are not corporations. It could be the sole proprietorship, it could be the partnership, or it could be limited liability, or any other types. Corporations, what happens? The business has its own tax. Corporation files its own tax, which has nothing to do with the personal tax of the owners. Okay. So, as I said, corporation is a type of company. So, uh, now there are other also different types of companies that we have. One is a limited liability company. A limited liability company is neither a partnership nor a corporation, but has characteristics of both partnership and corporation. Okay, now when we say partnership, what characteristics do they have? Characteristics is that the owners are able to participate in business decisions. That's partnership, right? But when we talk of uh, when we talk of corporation, where does it come about? That protection of individual assets of the owners, that is there. That's the corporation part. Okay, and it's very flexible. The operation is quite flexible. That's why it's a very common choice for business owners to go for a limited liability company, right? And if you have to start a limited liability company, you need to file a certificate of formation of the company with the Secretary of State in the country, right? uh, okay, so this which would help you to choose whether your company will be managed by its members or a manager. Next type of company that we have, these are special types, limited partnerships. Limited partnership is where you have two or more partners, of which one is a general, at least one will be a general partner and one will be a limited partner. A general partner is one who is looking after the day-to-day activities, right? Whereas the limited partner is a partner who will be involved in the crucial activities, crucial decisions. Okay, so and what happens, this agreement that is there, that need not have to be filed publicly. It doesn't have to be. Okay, so if you want to have a limited liability, the general partners, you have the option of registering as a limited liability partnership. You may or may not. So next comes up is concept and characteristics of incorporated entities. Incorporated entities is where we are talking of corporation, right? So what is it? Corporation is an incorporated entity. Corporation is the only incorporated entity which has a registered entity. It's registered. Because if it's unincorporated, like let's say the other types of companies, you don't have to register. It's not mandatory always to register all for it. Okay, so it's usually formed by a group of people with legal association, right? And it's authorized by the state, by the government, to act as a single entity, as that's one single person. It looks like one single person. Legally it's one person, and recognized in law for certain common purpose of forming members purposes. You're forming it for the purpose, like of all the members who those who are part of it, like they have you fulfill in order to fulfill the needs of those members. That's why that the law says so. Okay, and each of these incorporated entities are established by the charter, by a charter. That's the Companies Act, as we say. Okay, now what happens is, like more jurisdictions are now allowed for the creation of new corporations through registration. More the legal aspect is coming on with, because there are so many fraud cases happening. So the legal system is becoming more and more tight. So it's becoming very difficult to actually go for incorporation. Big companies are there, but not all big companies are corporations, right? So all the registered corporations have their legal personality, and their shares are owned by the shareholders. Okay, so they have the ability to enter into contracts, they can incur liabilities, they can buy, sell, or own assets in the name of the corporation, right? So this is where the charter that we talk of, this found in charter or articles of incorporation. That's where we talk about the company's law comes into play. Okay, or articles of incorporation we have it, right? Now, ownership of a corporation. When we talk of ownership of corporation, that is divided into shares of stocks. That's what we had actually said, right? How it depends, like how many the corporation has to decide how many shares are they going to float in the market. Accordingly, like if they're floating 10 shares, and the one of the shareholders is purchasing seven shares, so and the other purchases three, so actually it's two shareholders, right? And for any incorporated business, or as we say a corporation, incorporate business is also called corporation, right? It offers many benefits as compared to sole proprietor or partnership, where we've just spoken about the limited liability and the tax spread. It also have some tax benefits out there, right? So if you form a corporation, if you decide to make your business into a corporation, it allows you to raise capital through sale of shares of your company. You can do that. So what are the common types of the corporations that we have? Common types of corporation. Well, there are three types: C corporation, S corporation, and limited liability corporations. So what are, let's go into a little details. C corporation is where it's formed as a separate legal entity that's completely controlled by the shareholders. S type, it offers liability protection to the shareholders, and shareholders enjoy tax benefits, which is not offered under other business structures. Limited liability corporation, what happens? It benefits, like you can avoid double taxation on the profits, on corporate profits. Okay, that helps. Okay, now for forming the for going for forming a corporation, there are two documents which is needed. One is memorandum of understanding, the other is articles of association. Memorandum of understanding is the main compulsory document for incorporation, right? Which is talking about the objective, scope, power, and area of operation of a company. Whereas articles of association, that's a secondary document that is formed after MOA, which talks about the rules and regulations for the administration, management, and the management of the company. Let's look into a little more details about it, right? So, when we talk of memorandum of understanding, right? Memorandum of understanding is it contains the fundamental conditions upon which the company can be incorporated, right? So, what happens? It talks about the objectives of the formation of the company and the possible scope of its operations, was maximum possible scope of the operation of the organization beyond which it cannot go, right? So, and it serves a there are two purposes that it serves. Firstly, it helps the shareholders, creditors, and all others who are part of the company to know what their powers are and what is the range of its activities, right? So the intending shareholder can find out the purpose for which they are investing their money in the company. They can find out through the MOA, memorandum of understanding, helps the shareholders to actually they can find out that they're putting their money investing, but for what purpose, how is the company utilizing it, right? And what could be the risk that he is undertaking when they're going for that investment, right? Okay. And say anyone who's dealing with the company, say supplier, right, will also get to know whether the transaction that he is making with the company is within the objects of the company, or it does not, whether it should not violate, right? Whether it's within, it's legal, whether they're dealing, when they're dealing with a company, that they're dealing with, it's supplying things, that it's legal, it's used for legal purposes, legally it's being used, that's been legally approved, okay, and not into some illegal businesses. Okay, right? Next comes up is articles of association. Now, articles of association, as we say, these are the bylaws or the regulations which governs the management, how to operate their business, right? They talk about the duties, rights, powers, and authority of shareholders, directors, like how would they run about. So we, all those powers, roles, functions, responsibilities of directors, management, shareholders, everything comes from the articles of association, which we are going to talk about in the subsequent chapters. Okay, so it is a contract. For any articles of association of company, right? It's a contractual force between the company and its members, right? And also between members, amongst the members also, the company and its members, and also between all the members. Articles cannot supersede the objects set by the memorandum of understanding. Memorandum of understanding is the main, which is supplemented by articles of association. Okay, we were talking about joint stock companies, so let's go into a little more details on the evolution of joint stock companies. Now, modern corporation that we have, it started with the joint stock company. I spoke about the East India Company, British East India Company. That's a corporation, and that's a joint stock company. So, joint stock company is a business which is owned by its investors, shareholders, with each shareholder owning a share based on the amount of stocks purchased, right? Why is it created? To finance all the projects, right, that are very much expensive for a individual or even a government to fund. That's why. So owners of the joint stock company expect to have a share in its profits. That's why because they're investing money, right? So unless the company is incorporated, the shareholders of of joint stock company have unlimited liability of the company's debts, right? If it's incorporated, then the shareholders have limited liability, but if it's not incorporated, then the joint stock company can have the owners of it, that's the shareholders, have unlimited debts. Okay, the shares can be transferable, as we said. You can sell your shares, buy and sell shares. So, uh, Today what's happened is joint stock company and corporation, they are used, it's a synonymous term, that it says one and both of them are similar, right? So, or as we say, public company or just company, right? Except for the condition of unlimited liability, right? So John, like if it's a corporation, then it's limited liability. Otherwise, it's unlimited liability, right? So today, a modern corporation is a joint stock company that has been incorporated in order to have limited shareholder liability. Other than corporation, other types of companies, right, which have will be having unlimited liability can still be a joint stock company. You can still have shareholders investing money, right? And this is important. Each country has its own laws regarding a joint stock company, and this is included. These generally include a process of limited liability. Okay, so difference between incorporated and unincorporated business entities. So what is the difference? Now, when we say an unincorporated business, as we say, is or unincorporated, and let's talk of incorporated first. Incorporated business, or as corporation, the other name, it's a separate entity from its business owners. So it has its own legal entity separate from its business owners. I did tell you, corporation will go on running even if the owners change, if the owners pass away, as long as there's money, and the corporation and it has its own rights. Whereas unincorporated business, they are usually sole proprietor and partnership companies. Okay, right? So unincorporated business are corporations. Unincorporated businesses are could be sole proprietorships. It could be partnership. It could be also cooperatives. Right. So, right. So the next thing that comes up, if we are still continuing with the differences, now when we say when an association of individuals they come together for a common business objective and it gets unregistered under the Companies Act, it becomes an incorporated entity and also which is also known as corporation. Group of people having common objective goes for incorporation, that is getting registered under the Companies Act. That's corporation. Whereas an in, in case and it's not the same for an unincorporated business, right? Okay, so what happens in case of when association of individual does not get registered as a company, right, to form a separate in the entity, that is what is known as unincorporated entity or unincorporated business, just as what I said. And I was discussing with you a little earlier where I said that all uh, corporations, I was still like there are some incorporated business which like where we use these terms also as corporations. Sometimes we use them, right? We talk of them like unincorporated business, that sole proprietorship and partnership companies. So we sometimes tell them also, like we make the mistake, I told you, we make the mistake of saying that these are companies and also these are also corporations, but they are not companies, but they are not companies or they are not incorporated entities, right? So the main difference between incorporated and unincorporated business is the way owners actually take up the responsibility of their business activities. Okay, so when we discuss the differences, let's take up the various criteria based on which these differences come up. So as we were just discussing, business liability for for corporations, right? They are individual, independent. They have their independent legal entities, which is not so, right? They are for unincorporated business. They are running under the name of their owners, so it's an extension of the owners, right? So what happens? An unincorporated business, they are funded by their owners. So if the business runs out of fund, what will happen? The owners come up with, they have to face debts, which is not so in case of a corporate house. If they run out of money, owners are not legally required to pay that money, that whatever debt is there. Unlimited life. Unlimited life, when we say unlimited life, in the sense just we had discussed, in case of an incorporated house, right? The business goes on living as long as there is money. It can go on living. Owners can change, but it will go on. But in case of an unincorporated business houses, what happens? If money, if the owners they are actually leaving the business, or one of the partners die, and the business also will also close down, right? So that's the difference. Transferability of interest, right? uh, it is difficult to transfer interest in the business of small unincorporated business to a third party. But so what happens, the unincorporated owner may be able to share business assets. But he's generally unable to sell his interest in the business, because it's running under his name. So you cannot sell it that way. He cannot sell his interest in the business. Whereas in case of an incorporated business, an owner's interest in the business can be transferred. Like you can sell your shares to some other person, you can transfer that interest, because it's the owners are separate from the business, right? Unincorporated, it's your business, the business is running under your name, you cannot transfer it. Taxation, the tax benefit that we have, or let's go into taxpayer status, right? For unincorporated business, since they are not independent of the owners, so owners must report their share of the business income and loss on their personal returns. For corporate houses, they pay their taxes on any income they earn, right? It has nothing to do with the owners, right? If it is if it distributes any income of its owners, the owners pay tax on any cash they receive. They do not have to pay for the entire thing. If they're getting any returns, if they're getting dividends, they pay tax on that, right? So what happens is, because the in case of small unincorporated businesses, or the small business that we have, since the owners are paying for on their income, like they have to pay by themselves, so they are taxed only once. In case of a big corporations, business owners are taxed twice. One on the entire business, and the second comes up on if they are receiving any dividend, they are getting taxed. They get taxed twice. Business owners are taxed twice. Once on the dividend, they are getting paid. Like they get, if they do not get any shares, if they do not get any dividends, then they don't have to. But if some amount of the profit is just given to the owners will have to pay tax on that, right? So it's double taxation. So what we have up here is, in case of a corporate house, there is something called the business income tax, and you have personal income tax. So you are taxed twice. In case of unincorporated business, it's only your personal income tax. There's nothing called separate as business income tax. Okay. Credibility. Credibility. Uh, big corporate houses, financial institutions would prefer to lend money to big corporate houses. Why? Because big corporate houses, or they have their own established their entity, their name, their entity in the market. People are aware of it, and that's why these financial institutions have faith. So that's the reason why that's the reason where these big corporate houses can issue their shares if necessary to increase cash flow and service debts. So they can do that, right? And that's the reason where creditors look at this as an additional financial resource. They're giving money, so they're seeing the business houses are actually floating shares to raise money. To they have shares, enough shares. If the business falls into trouble, that shares can be sold. But they can pay because they have money. And when you have money and you have a reputation, financial institutions have more trust. Okay, because there is something to be kept as mortgage. Tax benefits of incorporation. Okay. Uh, Tax benefits. Tax liability of the corporation is separate from its owners. Owners pay their own tax, the business pays their own tax. Whereas in case of unincorporated business, the owners have to pay the tax as the business. There's no separate tax on the business. They have to just pay by themselves on the whatever the profit they are earning, right? So, incorporation of companies. Let's talk about coming up to incorporations of companies under the Companies Act. Like incorporation, what is incorporation? It's the legal process that is used to form a corporate entity, okay, or a company after the company acts as a separate legal entity of its own recognized by the law. It's a process of forming a corporate entity or or a company when the company acts as a separate legal entity separate from its owners, the process of formation. So where it's the process of forming, in other words, it's the process of formation of a corporation, right? Corporation has its legal entity, right? So the process of formation, the process involved to form a corporation whereby the corporation has its own legal entity, right? And so they are identified by the terms INC, or you have the names INC incorporated or limited in their names. It's a corporate legal entity which is completely separate from its owners. That's what I said. And when you form it, can be a public company or a private. For a public company, it's 7 or more people required, and at least 7. And for a private company, 2 is enough to form a private company. Okay, so what is the procedure for incorporation? So we see, so you have to first find name, whether come up with a name which is available, like you can, that you have to check if that name is if someone has already taken up that name or not. So which is there. Then preparing the MOA and the AOA, printing, signing, stamping, vetting of the memorandum and articles, power of attorney, other documents to be filed by the registrar of companies, statutory declaration in the e-form number, payment of registration fees, and certificate of incorporation. So let's go into those details, right? First thing is where you are, where, as I said, it comes about the name, right? So choose a name. It has to, a proper name has to be there, and it has to be it should be identified through the company should be identified through the name that under which it registers, right? It should be there, and it should be mentioned in the memorandum of understanding. It should be there, and the company's name should end with something called limited if it's a private company, and if it's a private company, if it's a public company, sorry, limited for public company, and if it's a private company, then a private limited. Okay, so what you have to do, you have to, for that, if you have your company, if you want to go for incorporation, you have to put an application to the registrar of the companies of the state, and 500 in India it's 500 rupees that you have to pay, right? Then the registrar allows the company to adopt the name, provided all legal documents, formalities are fulfilled within a period of 3 months. Second comes up, second stage, preparation of MOA and AOA, right? So that, as we've already discussed that in details. So what happens under which, like when we for MOA, you have to name the clause, registered office name. These are the things that comes. The clauses. There are 5 clauses which is involved there. One is the name of the company. One is the registered office, the objects, the liability, and the capital, right? And after that comes up the AOA. Okay, that has to be there, where all the duties, responsibilities, liabilities of the members are specified. Third is printing, signing, stamping, vetting of memorandum and articles. So it's a registrar of company which helps the promoters to draw up and draft the memorandum and the articles of association. And also with promoters who have no previous experience in drafting the memorandum and articles, it's especially to helping those who do not have their previous experience. Helping the registrar of company helps them, right? Once these have been vetted, means accepted by the registrar of companies, then the MOA and the AOA can be printed, right? And then these are further divided into paragraphs and arranged chronologically in an order. It has to be there. Then it has to be individually signed by each subscriber or their representative in the presence of a witness, otherwise it is not valid. So it's all the legal procedures that comes up, right? The fourth step is the power of attorney. This is required to fulfill the legal and complex documentation formalities of incorporation process. So the promoter needs to employ an attorney who will have the authority to act on behalf of the company and the promoters, right? So you will need to have, and the attorney will have the authority to make changes in the memorandum and articles, right? And other documents that has been filed with the registrar. Fifth stage is other documents that is filed to be filed with the registrar. It's E-form number 32, that is consent of directors. E-form number 18, that is notice of the registered address. E-form number 32, that is particulars of directors. Example, like in India, we have this. Sixth step is statutory declaration in E-form number 1. So this states that all requirements of the Companies Act and the rules under the law have been compiled with respect to matters that is precedent and incidental thereafter. Anything with any matters that's before and after, everything, right? Payment of registration fees. You need to pay a prescribed fee to the registrar of companies for incorporation, right? It depends on the nominal capital of the companies, which also have share capital, how much money, like it depends on the share capital. And then comes up the certificate of incorporation. So if the registrar is completely satisfied with all the requirements that has been fulfilled, they feel that the company has fulfilled, then he will register the company and issue a certificate of incorporation, right? So what happened? This the incorporated certificate, which is provided by the registrar, is the proof that all requirements of the Act, Companies Act, has been met. That's the last stage. So why do people go for incorporation? What are the benefits? The pros is like you can secure your assets and gain tax breaks, right? So we know that the owners enjoy limited liability protection. So these are, and they are not responsible for business debts. So what happens? You can protect your assets, right? So that's the big thing. And the other thing is you can also have tax advantages. That's another thing. You can grow your business for now and future. That's a huge, because you can actually raise capital, so you can grow your business. And even if the owner dies or sells interest, the corporation still goes on. That's not a problem. So easy transfer and faster funds. You can actually transfer your shares and through sale of stocks, and you can also raise funds, right? That is also possible. What are the uh, problems that can come up? One is, as I said, is double taxation. That is up there. Double taxation is where you get taxed like once on the taxation, especially when we are talking of income from the dividends, right? Taxation from income. So once it's taxed on the owners, and then on the corporation. The business as a whole has to do that, right? But more record keeping. Big business houses, what happens? There are a lot of departments, a lot of projects, a lot of work, a lot of steps. So more and more records, and everything has to be recorded in a sequential manner. It's a lot of things, unlike the unincorporated businesses. Okay, right? So what are the benefits of remaining unincorporated? What can happen? We don't go for incorporation. Owner doesn't have to deal with the cost and paperwork required for the incorporation process. Reduces, there is a time can be reduced and money can be spent, and money spent keeping records and reporting to federal and state agencies, that can be reduced, right? Less time in maintaining the records and reporting to the agencies, right? Reporting, regular reporting is not required. You do not have to answer to shareholders, right? The owners control the finance of the company and can do whatever they want to do with the profits, right? And also, what happens? Uh, but you know what? Operating and when you have an incorporated organization, takes more time and money, right, in running it. That's another thing. More time, more money. Whereas incorporated, less time, less money. So it's definitely benefit. So common governance activities that comes up. When a corporation becomes a public company, the corporate governance, it starts expanding to include various regulatory rules, provides transparency for the shareholders, right? That is important. Like even what happens is governance policies relating to financial activities, procedures. So that's also there. Like these are also involved. Like the company has to reveal to it. Businesses now have more strict rules for human resources activities that fall under the state and the federal guidelines. So it's there, also there. So governance activities also becomes much strict. You will have dress codes. Dress codes are there. There are grievance procedures are there. So it's more and more difficult. All these you have more complex rules and regulations coming up. What are the common management activities that is there? One is where it helps the business to operate, management activities relating to the operation of the business, where instructions are coming from the top leaders telling how to operate the business. Okay, uh, plans are created for developing, for pricing, promoting, distributing the products. Proper systems are there to monitor the plans and review it. Management plans are made to actually manage the employees. How would you manage training them and then helping them, which would help them to perform better? Operations analysis of operations takes place, which helps management to decide if the company needs to have any change in practices. So these are the common management activities that comes up in an incorporated after you go for incorporation. So let's go into a little more of the advantages and disadvantages of incorporation. Incorporation, as we say, it's the formation of a new corporation. Okay, formation of a new corporation. Now, this corporation can be a business, non-profit organization, it can be sports club, government of a new city or town, anything, right? So, what are the um, advantages? The first advantage, as we said, is which helps a business owner. It protects a business owner from the debts and liabilities of the business, so it's separated, right? Limited liability. The owners are not liable for the debts and obligations of the corporations until and unless they are provided a personal guarantee. Perpetual existence. The corporation goes on surviving, living as long as there is money. It doesn't affect the running of the corporation. Does not affect with the passing away of retiring or passing away of the owners, of the retiring of officers, or change of management doesn't happen. Capital acquisition. Corporation can easily acquire capital through the selling of shares. Right? They can do that. Tax advantages are there. Tax advantages where we have lower income tax rates are there, right? You can carry forward the losses of previous years to offset the profits in subsequent years. You can just carry forward the tax advantages are there. Mergers and acquisitions. For corporate house, it's easy to merge or go for acquiring some other businesses. It's easy. It's much more easier. Right. So, what are the drawbacks? First is the startup cost. Setting up a corporation is very expensive, right? And there are a lot of methods that has to be carried out. Record keeping requirements. There are a lot of records that has to be maintained about all the stakeholders, even the process, how they're going about. Annual filings is mandatory, right? They have to file their annual filings with the government regarding their returns. Double taxation is there. Yes, so income generated by the corporation is taxed twice at the corporate level and the shareholders level. So corporation pays their own taxes on the income and the shareholders have to pay tax on the dividends that they receive from the corporation. So it's taxed twice. So next comes up with this is the last thing that we have in today's class, which we talk of the different theories of corporate governance, right? What are the different theories that we have? Different group of experts have come up with different theories. So uh, but one thing is there an important theme of corporate governance is all of these theories talks of the nature and extent of accountability of people in business, right? Nature, the nature and extent of accountability of people. So let's talk of the different theories. First comes up is agency theory. Now, agency theory, as we say, it was developed first came up in 1972 and further developed in 1976. It's talking about the relationship between the principals, who are the shareholders, and the agents, who are the company executives and managers. Principal means the main person. The main person in an organization are the investors, the shareholders. Agents are someone who works on behalf of someone else. So the company executives and the managers, they are working on behalf of the shareholders. Why? Shareholders are investing money for the business. The executives and the managers utilize this money for running the business. So they are working on behalf of the shareholders because they're using their money. Whoever gives money is the main person, right? So it's that's why it's the shareholders who are the owners or the principals, right? And they are actually giving the money for the for the executives and the managers to work. So they are the managers and executives are the agents, right? So okay, so this is what the agency theory talk about: relationship between the principals and the agents. It's the theory is it's a simple theory where it's actually talking about that corporation has only two participants, managers and shareholders. It also says that the employees or managers in an organizations can be self-interested. It talks about it. How self-interest? Why self-interest? Because if they're able to work, then what happens? If they have their own self-interest, then what happens in that case? If self-interest means then there will be opportunistic behavior coming up. They're using the money, utilizing it there for own interest, then what happens? Problem comes up in such case, right? There can be huge difference between what the principal and the agents. There can be huge difference between the goals of the principal and the agents. The goals of the principals or the shareholders says that they are investing the money for the projects which would be, and the returns will be there, and everyone would be profitable. Whereas agents, they can misutilize that money and to serve their own interest. It can happen. So agency theory does talk of it like there are two constituents, managers and shareholders, and there is a possibility that the managers and employees can be self-interested, and then the problem comes up. Okay, so there is a risk. There's always a risk here. Right. So here, what when we talk of the agents, it's when we talk of the agency theory, it says that employees and or the people who are there working employees, even a manager is an employee. They are accountable in their task and responsibilities. Why are they accountable? When we use someone else's money, we are accountable for that money. How we are using it, we are answerable, right? So it does talk about that also, our responsibility, our accountability towards the shareholders. That's there, whereby the employees have to ensure that the needs of the shareholders are met. It has to be there. So, for that, what is required is a good governance structure. That is important. A very good governance structure is needed. If it doesn't happen, that means if the governance, corporate governance structure is challenged. Next comes up is stewardship theory. Now, stewardship theory, when we talk of stewardship theory, stewardship comes from the word stewards. Stewards are people who are providing service on flights, on in the hotels, in the ships, and the trains. Yeah, these are people. So they are serving the customers, and the purpose is to ensure that the customers are satisfied. If the customers are satisfied, then what happens? Through word of mouth, more customers, and that would also, like, the business and expands. Every stewards are also benefited. So if you relate it with the corporation, steward, who's a steward? Steward are the company executives. Who are the customers? They are the shareholders, because they are paying the money. If shareholders are happy, more and more shareholders comes in. Now, stewardship theory is similar to agency theory. Only thing is here is agency theory. Agency theory is the agents work on behalf of the share, on the principal, the shareholders, right? The executives are working on behalf. Stewardship theory is the executives are ensuring that the shareholders are needs are satisfied. That's the difference. They're not working on behalf, right? So it's a steward, or the company executives protects and maximizes shareholders' wealth through performance of the firm. Because what happens if that happens, then the stewards' utility functions are also maximized. So they're working. They will also get maximum benefits, right? So their stewards, as I said, they are the company executives and managers who are working for the shareholders, protects and makes profit for the shareholders. And they're doing it. They're ensuring that the shareholders are happy, right? Uh, so what happens is, in case of agency, like unlike agency theory, stewardship theory talks about the role of management towards stewards, integrating their goals as part of the organization. So they are actually working, right? They are working to ensure that the how to ensure that their own goals are merged with that of the organization. What is the goal? To earn the, even for a company executive, that what is the main goal? It's that they should also get more salary, they should get promotion. So how is that possible? Only when they are doing the right job, they are ensuring that the shareholders are satisfied. So if that happens, the organization's objectives is also met, the organization grows. So integrating their own goals with that of the goals of the organization. So that's what stewardship theory talks about. Whereas in case of agency theory, it's talking about working on behalf, someone's on behalf of someone else. Okay, so this is the picture of the stewardship theory. This is how it goes about, right? So stewardship theory, it's what does it also say? That stewards are satisfied and motivated when organizational success is attained. Like that is possible when the shareholders are happy. That's possible. Okay. right? Okay. uh okay. So what also stewardship, when we talk of stewardship theory, it also talks about the position of employees and executives, right? To act more autonomously so that the shareholders' returns are maximized. It acts on that you should be working autonomously, you should take in decisions to work to ensure that the shareholders' returns are maximized. There, it talks about it. Gives a should be acting more like rather not dependent and rather not getting carried away. So that talks also about your responsibilities. So it talks about also the role of CEO and the chairman, right? Where then they to ensure that the agency cost is reduced, that is conflict between the shareholders and the executive, that is um, that needs to be reduced. And so what can happen, there has to, which means that there has to be a bigger role played by the executives, right? So that has to be there. So they need to protect the interest of the shareholders, they have to ensure that they are satisfied. Next comes up is the stakeholder theory, right? So stakeholder theory is this is the structure. Stakeholder theory. Now, here what's happening. Stakeholders, we said when I was talking to you at the beginning, stakeholders are all those entities who are directly or indirectly related with the organization. Shareholder is also a stakeholder, but who are the others? You have the customers, you have the suppliers, you have the employees, right? Even the managers are also stakeholders, right? Government, society. So, for an organization, right? Organization has to have fulfill their obligations, fulfill their responsibilities, not just to shareholders, but to all other stakeholders also. That's what stakeholder theory says, that an organization, a corporation is responsible for it's responsible for the satisfaction, fulfilling the and to responsible for fulfilling the responsible for fulfilling all the obligations towards all their respective stakeholders. It could be anyone, like it could be anyone in the sense, it could be towards their employees, it could be towards their customers, towards the government, towards the shareholders, towards the society, right? So now how it's been done is like as I said, like how is this being done? Like when we talk of government, like paying taxes on time, law of the country is abiding by the laws of that economy, right? Uh, then, when we talk about the customers, ensuring that the right product is supplied to them at the right time, at the right price, reasonable price, providing feedback, suppliers paying them on time, paying the money for the resources, right? Then paying your debt, all those debtors, financial institutions, paying your employees, providing them with facilities, healthy working conditions. So all these comes into play. Okay, so everything. It's basically it's not just when we talk of stakeholder theory, we are talking of a network of relationship of many people, right? It's a lot. It's a lot of people. So there's it actually focuses on the managerial decision making, because how the top level is going to decide and where the decision should be taken in the interest of the stakeholders. That should be there. Okay. Next comes up is where we talk of resource dependency theory. Right. This is again you have the model. Now, resource dependency is when we say, resources needed by the organization, right? Who is responsible for ensuring that when from where to get those resources, how to get that resources, at what cost, when to, like what is the best way to get it. So it's the directors who plays a vital role in that. They are the linkage between the organization and the external environment. They decide when to get the resources, what kind of resources, from where to get it, and at what cost. So that's what resource dependency theory is. If a firm has to have sufficient resource, has to achieve success, it has to have sufficient resources on hand. And sufficient resources on hand means availability of the best quality resources at the right time, right? So it's the directors who has to play that role. Okay, so what happens, as I said, right? If availability of resources, it helps in the functioning of the organization, firm's performance and its survival. So that's where the directors come into play. They provide these resources. These resources could be information, skills, it could be access to suppliers, buyers, public policy makers, social groups, as well as being legitimate, right? Legitimacy where it's legal. Okay, so directors, when we say, they can be categorized into four types. Like they can be insiders. Insiders, that's the executive team. They could be business experts. They could be the support specialists. They could be community influentials also. Anyone. So when we talk of insiders, they are the, as I said, the current executives, sometimes former executives also, who provide expertise on certain areas, right? Business experts are current, former, and senior executives and directors of other large or profit firms. What do they provide? Expertise on business strategy, business decision making, and problem solving. Third, as I said, is the support specialist. They are lawyers, bankers, insurance company representatives, and public relations expert, and they provide support in the individual specialized fields. And the last group, that is community influentials. Community means political leaders, university people, members of the clergy, leaders of social or community organizations. So these are the different groups of directors that we have, right? Okay, next comes up is transaction cost theory. Now, transaction cost theory, it is talking about uh, it's basically where it views firm as an organization comprising of people with different views and objectives, right? So what happens here in this sense that, see, if I try to understand what I'm trying to say here, it's a little different from the other theories. Now, every firm, every organization has different people, multiple people working, right? Each has their own different views on objectives, on aspirations. When these people are joining the firm, the main objective is that they have to work to ensure that the overall goals of the organization is met, right? But parallelly at the same time, each of these individuals also are have wants to fulfill their own aspirations. That's why they join these companies. They may have their own problems. Who's going to look after that? It's the management, it's the executive who has to look into it. So it's the job of the executive to actually look into the personal aspirations, the needs, the views, the objectives of the individual employees who are there, have an interaction with them, solve their problems if possible, or come up with alternatives. So interaction between the top level executives and the employees, any interaction is called transaction. That's the meaning of transaction. And when a transaction happens, interaction happens, that involves a cost. That cost could be monetary cost, it could be non-monetary. Time is also a cost, giving time. That's what transaction cost theory is. Okay. So what happens in a it says that, the assumption of the transaction cost theory says that firms have become so big that they what they try to do, they sometimes substitute the market in determining the allocation of resources. They substitute for the market, they for determining the allocation of resources. It's so big that they actually start they would act, it's become the firms in these are big corporations, they become so they are quite large in operation, so they In reality, they start actually substituting for the market before determining the allocation of resources. So, in other words, if we say, so what happens? The organization and the structure of firm can determine price and production. It can determine, right, like what would be the price that you're paying, what is the production that is there. So what happens in this case is where we would need to have, when you determine the when you're thinking of the market size, when you get into the market size, right, you need to change the organizational structure to determine the price and to determine the production. What is also needed is you should also have the right kinds of human resources. You have to take into consideration the opinions, views of the employees. What do they have to say? And you have to look into their interest also. And if the organization becomes too vast, then they actually start thinking of the market. They forget about their own employees. They feel employees are out there to achieve the goals of the organization. But they forget that individual employees also have their problems, their aspirations, their needs. That needs has to be met. Their problems has to be addressed. So that interaction has to take place if they have to survive. That's what it talks about. Look after the interest of the individual employees. Look after their needs, see, have a discussion, have an open interaction. Interaction is transaction, and every transaction involves cost, time, or money, right? Okay, we come to the last theory, that is the political theory that we have. Now, political theory, when we these are the great politicians, political experts that we have, right? Political theory, it talks about, where you want to try to gain support of the shareholders, right, through voting, rather than forcing them to purchasing the voting power. So every organization, like when the elections of directors happen or some major decisions the company wants to take, voting should be there, and the shareholders should be free to give their opinion if they're against it or if they're for it, rather than forcing. That's what political theory says. Do not force, do not influence your shareholders. They should be allowed to freely decide, make their decision. Okay, so that's what it says, that it talks about allocation of corporate power, profits, and privileges, right? So this is where you give your decision uh, without any fear, unanimously, right? So it has what happens is the political model of corporate governance. It has an influence on governance developments. It has there, the government of a country has been seen to have a strong political influence on firms. It has happened. Like what has happened is like sometimes the law, sometimes when government is for their own benefits, they force the firms. They can do it. Force the firms to do something. See the election campaigns in certain countries when it happens. These big firms, they are sponsoring. They're paying the money for the parties, for the election campaigns. That comes up. Give money. We'll give you benefit. That's the thing. You're forcing rather than asking them to willingly do it, right? So that's what we have in today's class. That's what we have. Okay, so this is where I actually stop. And if you have any questions, we can discuss about it in our in the later class.